On April 1st, 2001, in the Reliant Astrodome in Houston, Texas, one of the greatest professional wrestling events in the history of the WWF at the time, and in the history of the WWE up until now, took place. We're talking about what many people believe to be the greatest WrestleMania to ever take place in the history of the WWE, and that is WrestleMania X-7, or WrestleMania 17, with the main event bout for the World Wrestling Federation Championship in another meeting between two of the megastars of the company, in Stone Cold Steve Austin, the Texas Rattlesnake, going up against the Brahma Bull, the People's Champion, The Rock. And when we look at Stone Cold and The Rock, those are obviously two of the cornerstones of the Attitude Era, which took place from around the late end of 1997 through the beginning of 2002, and then it would branch off into the Ruthless Aggression Era. The other cornerstones of the Attitude Era would be Triple H, who had one of the best years of his career in becoming the World Wrestling Federation Champion during the McMahon-Helmsley era, the year previous to this in 2000. And then the final cornerstone of the so-called Attitude Era, in my opinion, would have to be none other than the Phenom and the American Badass at the time in The Undertaker. All four of the cornerstones, or pillars that some people like to call it, of this Attitude Era would battle against each other during this WrestleMania in the Houston Astrodome. You had Undertaker versus Triple H for the Undertaker's undefeated WrestleMania streak, and then you had Stone Cold versus The Rock, which we already touched on, and we'll go into a deeper dive when we get closer to talking about the main event of the evening. I'm not going to cover every match on the card because there are some matches throughout this WrestleMania that I don't feel like we really need to touch on. But there are certain pieces of this event, and the so-called meat and potatoes, that are going to take up a majority of this video. We'll kick it off with the Intercontinental Championship match between the champion and Y2J Chris Jericho defending the title against William Regal. Now, I'm not going to go into a maneuver for maneuver, analysis of this entire match, but, the lead up to this match was pretty funny, and Jericho was constantly antagonizing William Regal and constantly poking the bear, even going as far as to take a pee inside of his tea that he was drinking, and then he would pour the cup and you would drink it and you would see the look on William Regal's face. I mean, the lead up, the build up was hilarious. Y2J during this time, after he debuted in the WWF, was probably at the top of his game early on in his WWF career. And, just the build-up to this match was extremely hilarious. I believe they would go on to have a Duchess of Queensberry rules match at Backlash 2001 following WrestleMania. But Y2J would go on to retain the Intercontinental Championship and defeat William Regal. But the build-up to this match was everything, and especially Y2J peeing in the tea of William Regal and kind of pranking him. I remember it just cracked me up as a kid when I first watched this WrestleMania. And you could tell how much the powers that be had faith in Jericho, because in December of this year, in 2001, at Vengeance, he would become the first ever WWF Undisputed Champion by beating Stone Cold and The Rock in the same night. So this was kind of, building up the momentum towards the end of the year for Jericho, but he would retain his Intercontinental Championship here on the grandest stage of them all. Alright, and then we'll move into my personal favorite match of the night, which was a triple threat match for the WWF Hardcore Championship. We knew at the time, in 2000, in 2001, and 2002, the Hardcore Championship was some of the most entertaining segments from weekly television in the WWF, and in this match it was the champion in Raven defending the title against the Big Red Machine Kane and the Big Show in a triple threat hardcore match. This is one of the best hardcore matches that they had, and it's one of the best matches in the history of the Hardcore Championship and its lineage from start to finish. I mean, Raven walking in as the champion, I remember during his entrance, he walked out with the shopping cart, and he threw a little Frankenstein, doll into the ring. It was like a little Frankenstein statue or like a ventriloquist dummy, and I always remember that for some reason. The Frankenstein doll in his shopping cart with the stop sign, with the trash cans, with the kendo sticks, and the match between him, Big Show, and Kane was just unbelievable. Kane at the time, I think this is my favorite look for the Big Red Machine in 2001 when he would rejoin with Undertaker and the Brothers of Destruction later during the year. I just loved everything about this match. It was balls to the wall. They fought backstage in the Astrodome. They were, going back and forth. Even Raven getting chucked through the window backstage, right through the glass. Raven riding on a go-kart backstage with the referee with him. And then Big Show and Kane trying to jump on the go-kart and, pull Raven off. They fought in a little, caged area backstage with a bunch of weapons. And the end of the match would come when Big Show would hoist up Raven for a chokeslam off the stage through this glass, like, I don't know what it was. It was like a glass, not a cylinder, I'm trying to think of the word. It was like a glass compartment or a glass container that had a bunch of wood and like debris inside of it, and he would actually hit a big boot on the Big Show. Raven and the Big Show would fall into this container on the side of the stage, and then Kane would run off and land a leg drop onto both men inside this thing, driving them through the debris, driving them through, I think there was a table in there, a wooden board, and then he would actually get the 3 count, and the referee would be on the outside of the big compartment or big container and count the 1, 2, 3. That was one of the most iconic hardcore matches. It's my personal favorite hardcore match from the title during the Attitude Era, and this match was unbelievable. If you haven't watched Kane versus the Big Show versus Raven from WrestleMania X-7, do yourself a favor and check it out, but don't forget to finish the video before you do that. And then we would move on to Eddie Guerrero's first WrestleMania match under the WWF banner. After coming over to the World Wrestling Federation after his time in WCW, he would challenge Test for the European Championship in his first WrestleMania match, and it was basically Test versus Eddie, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn in the form of the newly formed team at the time in the Radicals, and it was basically a 3-on-1 handicap match, and Test having to find a way to retain his title against a man who would become synonymous with lying, cheating, and stealing later on in his career in Latino Heat, Eddie Guerrero. And Test wouldn't be able to overcome the odds. He tried. He fought off Perry Saturn. I believe he might have fought off Albert at the time as well. He fought off Dean Malenko and just tried everything he could to retain the title, but the end would come after Eddie Guerrero would get a hold of the European Championship and hit Test in the head after the referee was distracted and get the 1, 2, 3 to become the new WWF European Champion. That's about all I gotta say for this match, but for the first match for Eddie Guerrero, first WrestleMania match for Latino Heat inside the WWF, it was definitely a successful one for Eddie. We then move on to what many people believe to be one of the greatest WrestleMania matches to ever take place, in a singles match between the Olympic gold medalist and Kurt Angle and another man who came over to the WWF after his time in WCW in the Rabid Wolverine, Chris Benoit. Benoit versus Angle in their first WrestleMania singles match. I mean, it was exactly what you would expect. Some of the sharpest technical wrestling from any performer showcased in professional wrestling, and especially inside the World Wrestling Federation. With Paul Heyman on commentary, which is something I wanted to touch on, and I was probably going to touch on it more later in the video. I loved Paul Heyman on commentary during this WrestleMania event. I loved Paul Heyman on commentary during the Attitude Era, especially in 2001. I know a lot of people disliked it. A lot of people weren't a big fan of Heyman on commentary, but me personally, I think he added a lot to the calling of the matches, especially with his emotional reactions. And I enjoyed his work on the commentary table, but with Benoit and Angle, I mean, two of the sharpest technical wrestlers to ever grace the sport of professional wrestling. Back and forth mat holds, scrambles, chain wrestling, transitions, submission for submission, position for position, a chess match of technical wrestling and mat wrestling ability, which at the time is something that I don't believe wrestling fans really appreciated, but now in this modern day and age where technical wrestling and mat-based wrestling and scrambles is so much more appreciated, I think that they look back on WrestleMania 17 and it was something that was kind of a diamond in the rough, and it would lead us into the Ruthless Aggression era, the era of the SmackDown 6, which I'll probably make a video on later on. But Benoit and Angle, two of the sharpest technical wrestlers and some of the first wrestlers inside the WWF or WWE to showcase technical wrestling and mat-based ability, which would build the foundations for the WWE and the pro wrestling business that we live in now. So Benoit and Angle, absolutely class, absolutely phenomenal match. The ending came when Benoit got hit with a low blow from Angle when he was in a belly-to-back position and the referee couldn't see it, and Angle would roll him up for the 1, 2, 3 and get the WrestleMania victory. But phenomenal match, and would you really expect anything different from these two? Alright, and the next match we're going to talk about was a featured bout for WrestleMania X-7 between the McMahons. It was Shane McMahon alongside Linda McMahon in a wheelchair versus the boss, the chairman, the villain at the time, and a rival of Stone Cold Steve Austin, which we'll get to later, in Mr. McMahon. Father versus son, son versus father. On the side of Mr. McMahon, you had Stephanie and Trish Stratus, and on the side of Shane and Vince's son, you had his mother and the wife of Vincent Kennedy McMahon in Linda McMahon. This match was a soap opera at its finest in terms of the World Wrestling Federation. Like, I know a lot of people say that the WWF is just a soap opera with men, chair shots, and clotheslines, but this match was built on emotion. It was built on stability of a family that was falling apart. And I've talked about family falling apart with the Roman Reigns and Jey Uso and Bloodline story, including Sami Zayn, but we're going back to the Attitude Era for this one, baby. So that's going to be a different topic for another day. But this match was fantastic, and you had the commissioner, Mick Foley, being the special guest referee for the match as well, who clearly didn't like Vince McMahon. I mean, everybody knew that he never was a fan of Vince McMahon, and throughout this entire match, I mean, Linda McMahon was in a wheelchair. She was idle due to the stress and everything going on with her husband and the alleged affair that was going on in the time in storyline perspective with Trish Stratus and Vince McMahon. Kind of like Trish was almost like the younger version of Linda, prettier, hotter, you know, and kind of goes along with the HLA, which would kick off in the WWE in 2002. But again, we're not going to touch on that here. You know, this was Shane defending his mother against his father in the maniacal a-hole in Vincent Kennedy McMahon. This entire match was about Shane defending the honor of his family and defending his mother against their maniacal father and Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And it was about Vince showing Linda firsthand and up close how he was going to treat their son and how she should treat their son as well for the way that he's been acting. So, you know, you could tell the raw emotion, the family dynamic. This match had everything going for it at the time in 2001. And if you took a look into the proverbial looking glass later on in the year in 2001, Vince McMahon would actually go head-to-head with their son and Shane because Shane would go to purchase WCW, and it would be the Invasion angle, which had a lot going for it and had a lot of fans behind it, and it had so much potential, but obviously the Invasion towards the tail end or middle part of 2001 didn't live up to the hype, but that kind of built up right after this match between father and son. And that's always an interesting tidbit to keep in mind when going back and looking at this WrestleMania for this retrospective. So going into the match, I mean, Trish Stratus, at least in storyline perspective, if it wasn't clearly stated, was kind of looking to take the place of Linda McMahon in Vince McMahon's life, while Shane McMahon was defending his mother's loyalty, and defending his mother's honor against their father. The match was great. They went back and forth. Shane McMahon beating up on Vince, you know, the typical Shane McMahon match. Vince McMahon coming back and being able to land some big moves on Shane. And then the big moment of the match would be when Vince would call for Linda to be brought into the ring so she could watch Vince McMahon beat on their son. He would raise up the trash can to hit Shane McMahon in the head as he was down on his knees, and Linda McMahon would stand up from the wheelchair. This had been built up for weeks, built up for months, and when she stood up out of that wheelchair, the Houston Astrodome went unglued. They were screaming, cheering, and everything. Vince McMahon turned around slowly with a look of fear in his eyes, like he had just seen 1,000 men coming at him, looking to take what was his. Linda McMahon would slap Vince McMahon, I believe, and then kick him right below the belt and give him a good old shot in the family jewels. During that time also, Mick Foley would come in, land some big shots on Vince McMahon to help Shane McMahon, and they would all beat up on the chairman. Shane would prop Vince McMahon into the corner, go up to the corner on the opposite side of the ring, and jump off and hit a coast-to-coast right into a trash can that was propped on the chest and face of Vince and Kennedy McMahon. The trash can would, bam, slam right into the face of Vince. Shane would pull Vince out of the corner, and 1, 2, 3, the son would defeat the father, and Shane McMahon would get the comeuppance on his father for their mother in Linda McMahon. Great match, great storytelling, great action, huge spots. If you haven't checked out Vince vs. Shane from WrestleMania 17, after you watch this video, go check that out. What are you doing? Up next, it would be what many people believe to be the greatest match of the night, the best match of WrestleMania 17, the biggest talking point of WrestleMania 17 aside from the main event, in TLC 2 between the teams of Edge and Christian, the Dudleys and Bubba Ray and Devon, and the Hardy Boys for the WWF Tag Team Championships. The Dudleys and Bubba Ray and Devon came into the match defending the titles. This was TLC 2. The first TLC match took place between these three teams during SummerSlam of 2000. So SummerSlam 2000 was TLC 1, TLC 2 was at WrestleMania 17, and I believe TLC 3 took place on an episode of SmackDown between some other teams in that match as well. But this match was phenomenal. I mean, you know the big spots. You know, Jeff Hardy landing the Swanton Bomb on the outside of the ring. You know, Lita getting 3D'd after coming down to the ring to try to save the Hardy Boys and get them to win the tag team titles. She would get 3D'd by the Dudleys, get gored by Rhino. Rhino would come into the match to aid Edge and Christian in retaining their titles, and he would actually play into the finish of the match where he would put Edge and Christian on his shoulders. I think he put Christian on his shoulders and walked him up the ladder because they were so beat and broken down, and helped them in taking down the tag team championships. I mean, the biggest spot of the match was clearly the spear that Edge hit from one ladder as Jeff Hardy was hanging onto the titles above the ring. Jumped from the ladder to Jeff Hardy in the middle of the ring, hanging from the ceiling on those titles, and hit the spear right to the mat in the middle of the ring from the ceiling. Sold it perfectly. The arena was going unglued, man. It was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, so many spots. The 3D to Lita, Rhino coming down to help Edge and Christian, to spear, or I'm sorry, Gore, I should say, Spike Dudley through the tables. I mean, a member of the Dudleys and Edge and Christian going through the tables. Spike Dudley and Rhino getting swanton bombed from the top of the ladder through the tables by Jeff Hardy. I mean, Lita landing a Hurricane Rana on Rhino as he tried to help Edge and Christian. There was so much that went on in this match. This is one of the best tag team matches in the history of professional wrestling. The best tag team match of the Attitude Era, or one of the best tag team matches in the Attitude Era. This match is iconic. This match built the legend of Edge and Christian, the Dudleys, and the Hardys. This match was the birthing of tag team wrestling inside the World Wrestling Federation, but the ending came when Rhino put Christian onto his shoulders, I believe, and they climbed up to the top of the ladder and was able to get to the titles before a member of the Dudleys was able to retain their titles. So the winners of the match, who were also the winners of the first TLC match at SummerSlam 2000, were Edge and Christian to become the new World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Champions. Go out of your way and check this out. I've said that about multiple matches on this video already. I've said that about the entire event. There's a reason that WrestleMania 17 was one of the best WrestleManias of all time. So if you haven't watched TLC 2 between the Dudleys, the Hardys, and Edge and Christian, come on, man, get it together. And then we move on to the co-main event of WrestleMania 17, if you want to call it that, in The Undertaker defending his WrestleMania unbeaten streak against The Game, the former World Wrestling Federation champion, the biggest star of the World Wrestling Federation in 2000. This was his year, the previous year I should say was his year, in Triple H. The first WrestleMania encounter between Triple H and The Undertaker. It was all about respect going into this match. I mean, it was about Triple H defeating The Undertaker, the cerebral assassin, taking out the American Badass, and hurting him and staking his claim as to why he was the Game. It was about respect. A lot of the matches when Undertaker portrayed Big Evil or the American Badass were about respect, and this was no different. Triple H was a main eventer. Triple H was a former world champion, but he hadn't gotten the notoriety yet as to what he will become known as and what he had become known as up until this point, with all the accolades, the world titles, the Royal Rumble wins, and stuff like that. So even though Triple H was a main eventer at the time, going up against Undertaker for the first time at WrestleMania, he still wasn't at the level that we needed him to be. But this match really pushed him over the top after his amazing year in 2000, which, like I said, was Triple H's year. The Undertaker would go on to defeat Triple H, but there was some good spots in this match, man. They fought into the crowd. They climbed up onto, like, the scaffolding, and then he would get hit with a choke slam off the scaffolding through tables and, like, a big platform on the ground in the middle of the crowd. Undertaker would land that choke slam to Triple H through all the debris on the floor. Triple H would get hoisted up into the last ride, but he would grab the sledgehammer and smack Undertaker in the head as he hoisted him up in the air. Go for the 3 count, but he couldn't get it. But it would come down to Undertaker finally defeating Triple H with a last ride in the center of the ring and getting the 1-2-3 to still remain unbeaten at WrestleMania. This was a phenomenal match. I loved Triple H at this time. I loved the American Badass Undertaker. 2001 is probably my favorite year of the entire Attitude Era, and I know I'm not the only one. I'm definitely in the majority, not the minority, I feel like, but this match was great. There was some good moments, and going off of what we would come to see down the line in years, decades down the line, with the WrestleMania 27 match between Undertaker and Triple H, which took place 10 years after their first meeting, which is what we're discussing here, at least their first meeting on the WrestleMania stage. And then, at WrestleMania 27, when people thought it was going to be Sting versus Undertaker, turned out to be Triple H. They had a phenomenal match there. Undertaker would defeat him again. And then the match at WrestleMania 28 in the Hell in a Cell end of an era match, Shawn Michaels as the special guest referee. I mean, this was just the building blocks and the foundation for the phenomenal rivalries that Triple H and The Undertaker would have during the Attitude Era, during the Ruthless Aggression Era, and obviously into the PG era. I mean, two of the best in the entire history of the WWE, two of the pillars of the Attitude Era like we touched on in the beginning of the video, but The Undertaker would defeat Triple H and improve his WrestleMania undefeated streak. A phenomenal match here for the dead man in the game. And then finally, we get to the main event of WrestleMania X-7 for the World Wrestling Federation Championship between the champion at the time in The Rock defending the title against the 2001 WWF Royal Rumble winner in Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, I could sit here and talk for hours about the rivalry between Stone Cold and The Rock. Even people who don't watch WWE, even people who aren't even considered casual fans, who don't watch wrestling or professional wrestling in any stretch of the imagination, know who Stone Cold and The Rock are. They know Stone Cold Steve Austin. They know The Rock. They were two of the biggest stars ever in the history of pro wrestling, aside from the Attitude Era, which is where they got their upbringing. The first match in the WWF between Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock would take place at In Your House D-Generation X in 1997 for the Intercontinental Championship. Stone Cold would then go on to win the Royal Rumble in 1998 and challenge Shawn Michaels for the World Wrestling Federation Championship and win his first major world title on the grandest stage of them all. But when it comes to The Rock and Stone Cold's rivalry, these two were neck and neck throughout their entire careers. The first major match between Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock would take place at WrestleMania 15 after Stone Cold would eliminate The Rock and win the 1998 Royal Rumble. Stone Cold Steve Austin would then go on to challenge Shawn Michaels and the Heartbreak Kid for the WWF title and win the belt, thus having Shawn Michaels get knocked out by the baddest man on the planet and the special enforcer for WrestleMania 14 in Mike Tyson. Then we would move into 1999, which would be Stone Cold and The Rock's, like I said, first major WrestleMania match, and Stone Cold would go over on The Rock, defeating him for the first time in a major WrestleMania setting. We could skip over the year 2000 since that was more of Triple H's year, but The Rock did win the Royal Rumble that year by eliminating The Big Show. But going into 2001, Stone Cold would win the Royal Rumble by eliminating Kane, and 2001 is not only one of my favorite years, but it also has one of the best Royal Rumble pay-per-views and Royal Rumble matches that you'll ever see. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure to check out Royal Rumble 2001 before you watch WrestleMania X-7. But The Rock would come into this match defending the title against the Royal Rumble winner in Stone Cold Steve Austin. But what would go down at the end of this match would change the foundation of the World Wrestling Federation as it would slowly transition over into entertainment aside from being WWF with the WWE and branching off into the Ruthless Aggression Era. One of the best and biggest double turns in the history of professional wrestling took place at the end of this night. Stone Cold Steve Austin would go on to win the World Wrestling Federation Championship from The Rock here. And The Rock wouldn't end up getting a victory over Stone Cold Steve Austin until 2003's WrestleMania 19, and that would coincidentally be Stone Cold's last match until more recently when he returned at WrestleMania 38. But getting back on track and talking about WrestleMania X-7, it wasn't just the fact that Stone Cold defeated The Rock, because he had already done that a handful of times prior to this event. It was the fact that Stone Cold would align himself with the quote-unquote devil himself. One of his biggest rivalries throughout his rise in the Attitude Era in the chairman and the boss, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. The man who originally lost to his son earlier in the night in a no disqualification match with Mick Foley as the special enforcer or special guest referee, which we touched on earlier in the video. Vince McMahon would align himself with Stone Cold Steve Austin after Stone Cold Steve Austin would hit The Rock in the head with a steel chair. And it wouldn't just be one chair shot, because when The Rock was laying prone on the ground, basically unconscious, Stone Cold would unload with a barrage of about 15 to 20 steel chair shots, and he would beat the absolute living proverbial pulp out of the Great One. And it would be multiple chair shots over and over and over again to the limp body of the Great One, and then the referee going into the pin to count 1, 2, 3 for Stone Cold Steve Austin to become the new World Wrestling Federation champion. But we have to take into consideration the magnitude of Stone Cold aligning himself with McMahon. McMahon and Austin had one of the biggest and baddest rivalries, and it was really what catapulted the success of the Attitude Era in 1998 throughout 1999. I mean, Vincent Kennedy McMahon would win the 1999 Royal Rumble by eliminating Stone Cold Steve Austin after starting out the match at 1 and 2, and he would eliminate Stone Cold Steve Austin with the help of Stone Cold's WrestleMania opponent at WrestleMania 15 in Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, or the Great One, the People's Champion in The Rock. The reactions on commentary were priceless. Jim Ross losing his mind at the fact that Stone Cold could align himself with the man who single-handedly tried to destroy his World Wrestling Federation Championship reign and his WWF career during the year 1998 through 1999. One of the most iconic endings to a World Wrestling Federation or WWE pay-per-view at that, and one of the greatest WrestleMania endings with one of the greatest double turns in the history of professional wrestling, all took place in one magical night. And that magical night was WrestleMania X-7. The former beer-swindling, crowd favorite, hell-raising Texas Rattlesnake and Stone Cold Steve Austin becoming the new monster heel, aligning himself with, as we already touched on, the quote-unquote devil himself. And the former Rocky Maivia, the former corporate champion, and the eyebrow-raising, pie-tasting Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, going from a heel who people loved to hate, to a man that people would become known to cheer for, in the most iconic double turn that had ever taken place in pro wrestling. This has been my review of WrestleMania X-7, my review of one of the greatest wrestling events and one of the greatest pro wrestling nights in the history of the business. I'm your host, Double M, and I'm out. Don't forget to hit a Stone Cold Stunner on the like button and a rock bottom on the subscribe button. And if you're feeling froggy, raise your eyebrow to the video on screen.